So who here spent the last month playing the Crash N Sane Trilogy? Surprisingly, it was probably a lot of you, since the collection has apparently been doing far better than expected. I'm happy about that, because overall it's definitely a great recreation of the original 3 Crash Bandicoot games. Not perfect by any means, but still really nice. A lot of people have obviously already talked about the many great things this collection does, like making Crash 1 playable, as well as the missteps it has with things like the interactions between physics and the collision, jump speed, etc. I think there's a lot of extra complaining going around, implying that Crash was never good or whatever garbage, but that's beyond the point. There are a lot of little differences with this game though, from the ice physics kind of being botched, to the crouch being hugely delayed, jet ski physics being more hovercrafty, the swim faster action being nerfed to a huge degree when underwater, the fact that they made a ton of other quality of life improvements to Crash 1 but didn't pull the camera out during chase levels like Naughty Dog did starting in Crash 2, etc. There are 2 things that I've noticed nobody talk about though, at least in videos, and that's funny because these are actually the 2 things that upset me the most. So today I figured we could take a quick look at what these 2 issues are. First up is a much more fundamental difference from the original, which it took me quite a while to understand. I noticed that when using the analog stick, which is what I primarily use because I grew up mostly playing Crash 3 and Crash 2 Greatest Hits, which indeed had analog stick functionality, Crash seemed slow to get up and go with the analog stick in the N Sane Trilogy. It was only a few frames at most, but he definitely responded slower. At first I thought it might be a controller latency issue, but that was quickly proven incorrect by simply testing his response times. They were more or less the same as when playing the originals. But in doing that testing, I realized that while Crash started moving almost instantly, he didn't really start progressing right away. I chalked it up to something reminiscent of Mega Man X's controls in the Maverick Hunter remake. For some reason in that remake, when you press forward, X will move about a pixel and then he hesitates for a single frame or 2 before actually starting to move forward. I figured it was something like that because once Crash got up to go, he went like normal. It wasn't actually until I recorded footage for this video that I realized what the problem actually was, and realized why so few people are talking about it. Nobody else was mentioning the issue because most everyone else was using the D-pad instead of the analog stick. The problem doesn't seem to happen on the D-pad because Crash only has 2 speeds on the D-pad, go or don't go. People would mention that Crash doesn't feel as good on the stick as he does on the D-pad, but nobody was comparing it to the original stick controls. The problem is actually that Crash will always enter his walking animation for a frame or 2 before he starts running when using the stick. On D-pad, he can't walk, so this animation is skipped. While Crash can walk using the originals using the stick, if you aren't holding precisely in the walking area of the stick, he'll skip straight to running. The easiest way to notice and test this is by tapping rapidly in a single direction. On the D-pad in both versions, Crash will take a very small step forward. On the stick in the originals, he'll do the same thing. But on the stick in the N Sane Trilogy, Crash will animate forward, but won't move forward to the same degree. You can also test this by tapping back and forth in opposing directions. Every other control method sees him stepping forward still, but the modern stick controls see him rotate in place. It may seem like a small issue, and I wouldn't even call it a problem per se, but man, that screwed with me for most of my playthrough. And after not playing it for a week or so and then picking it back up to capture footage, I felt it yet again. Crash feels slow to react from a stop. The other concern is one I would definitely say is a legitimate problem, though I'm aware that might be my bias speaking up, because I love the affected levels so much. While I like a lot of the gameplay themes and ideas in Crash 3, my favorite by far are the Coco Tiger levels. These Animal Run levels in Crash have gone from frustrating slogs, to a decently fun challenge in the second one, to a masterpiece of a running level. With the addition of a sprint, rather than just a temporary speed boost like in Crash 2, these levels have become amazingly fun. They provide a beautiful challenge which begs you to be extremely technical with the sprint button in some sections, while trying to hold it outright everywhere else. I can't sing their praises enough. And unfortunately, they're really wonky in the N Sane Trilogy. I immediately noticed something was off when I fell straight into the first pit on the first tiger level. These are stages that I know extraordinarily well, and yet I died probably 8 or so times just beating that level for the crystal. Luckily, the issue here was not near as difficult to figure out as the first one, as I had it pinned down before I even finished the level. However, this also left me baffled as to how anyone could have felt this was a good design decision. In the original version of Crash 3, the camera can sometimes alter your path ever so slightly when playing these levels. As it turns, you may find it just a bit harder to move in the opposite direction, or you may find your heading altered by a few pixels. Not a big deal at all. In the remake, this was ratcheted up to 11,000. Sometimes, as the camera shifts, it becomes all but impossible to move in the opposite direction. Sometimes you can end up halfway across the width of the stage if you don't countersteer through a corner. Sometimes the camera will straight up push you into obstacles. This movement is extremely drastic, and it means the player is fighting the camera just as much as they're trying to navigate the level. Literally fighting the camera. Sure, I've gotten used to it enough that I can beat the stage without dying, and basically while sprinting the entire time on the remake, but it's not near as satisfying or fun, precisely because I'm not being challenged by the level near as much as I am by the camera. I think a lot of people complain too much about the cameras in Crash games. The issues with depth perception are common with all 3D platformers. Yeah, they probably could have made Crash's shadow a little bit darker in the N Sane Trilogy, but I don't think the camera is really the issue. It's that people have been spoiled by the ability to control the camera, and thus don't have the required skills to maneuver when they can't control the camera. I don't think this is a fault of the game. I think this is just an awkward mismatch of understandings, kind of like going from Devil May Cry to a Souls game. It's the same type of game, but presented with a completely different language that you have to learn to understand. But these levels are an issue. Honestly, it really doesn't feel good to play, and it was more the basic level design that had me still kind of enjoying them in spite of the control. And that's really it. This issue isn't any more complicated, so there's not much more I can say about it. Like I said up top, this collection isn't perfect by any means, but if they can fix a few small things, and maybe even if they can't, I can see these remakes potentially being my go-to for when I want to replay Crash in the future. It has a few presentation issues, it has some design issues, it has some pretty major control issues, but the effort is still really clear, and the games were still improved in many ways. I enjoyed this remake, and I hope they either get the chance to remake the Spyro trilogy, or even make a new classic-style Crash game. I would love to see Vicarious Visions really test their mettle on the original Crash formula with new content, and maybe even the original Spyro formula with new content. At very least, I think they could make competent successors, more competent than a lot of the stuff we got in the early 2000s anyway. What do you think? Have you played the N Sane Trilogy? Have you played the original trilogy? What things, positive or negative, stood out to you the most and why? See you in the next video. Hey, thanks for watching this video. If you're interested in another one, here's the last one that I uploaded. You can also follow me on Twitter or subscribe by hitting the subscribe button.